Hi, everyone. I'm Hilda Vega. I am Hispanics and Philanthropies Director of Philanthropic Practice. I have long dark hair, I am light skinned, and I am wearing a blue top and purple glasses. Like all of HIP's conversations, we do our best to provide our speakers with various options to be able to speak in their preferred language. So today we have Spanish language interpretation, and the instructions will be showing up on one of our slides for folks who need to access that information. Today, I'm very excited to welcome you all to our book charla, spotlighting Solito Solita, Crossing Borders with Youth Refugees in Central America. This is our 9th book charla, and it's part of a series that started in 2020 as a space to be able to highlight Latinx storytellers. In addition to my own work with HIP, I'm also a proud board member of Voice of Witness. Val is our co-host for today's charla and a leader in amplifying the voices of people impacted by and fighting against injustice by using the power of storytelling. We are joined today by Voice of Witness staff and 2 narrators from Solito Solita who will be sharing their stories of migration in honor of World Refugee Day, which this year is taking place on Monday, June 20th. Today's conversation is deeply important to HIP and our work because we work in partnership with and in support of migrants and refugees across the Americas. Our migration program in particular provides financial and capacity building resources to grassroots NGOs across the region who work with migrants and refugees, and especially the ones who have a hard time finding appropriate services. And by this, we mean women, children, indigenous people, Afrodescendiente migrants, LGBTQI plus migrants, and others who tend to be more vulnerable to discrimination along their journeys. For folks who have not read the book that we are talking about today, we will be sharing a link so that you can access the book and related resources. It shares stories of 15 young people who traveled to the US from Central America by themselves for different reasons, and each with different experiences along the way. While the book itself was published a few years ago, really very little has changed in terms of the experiences that people go through when they migrate to the US. And in fact, one of the reasons why storytelling is so important is because it transcends policy and it reminds us of the human lives that are impacted by policy action or inaction. Also, when done properly, storytelling changes our understanding of issues like migration, because when we hear directly from people experiencing migration, it is a very different thing than reading about it in the news or getting it from sources where people are really treated more like numbers. Javier Zamora, in the foreword of the book, talks about the work of Edwidge Danicat and Jose Antonio Vargas and finding guidance in the work of other migrants, noting, in them, I found bits I needed to hear, advice on how to stay truthful, advice on how to dictate how I want to be seen. I'm pleased to welcome Dao Tran, the managing editor at VOW, to guide today's charla with us. Dao is passionate about democratizing media and uplifting seldom heard stories. She's a managing editor with Voice of Witnesses book series, and before joining VOW, she was the senior editor at Haymarket Books. Dao, welcome.
Thank you so much, Hilda. Just a quick brief introduction to myself, Val's work, and then I'll pass it over to Luz and Christiane. I just wanted to note that I myself am also a refugee. I came to the United States as a young child with my family fleeing from Vietnam. We left Vietnam in an overcrowded fishing boat and were picked up by a giant Danish freighter. We spent months in a refugee camp in Hong Kong and finally arrived in a military base at Fort Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania. So I'm deeply thankful that I get to work at Voice of Witness and bring attention to those marginalized in our society, including immigrants and refugees, and not just to bring attention to the injustices surrounding people impacted by these issues in migration, displacement, and the criminal justice system, but that we actually uplift these stories in their wholeness, that we center the narrators themselves, and most importantly, highlight the work that they themselves are doing as agents of transformational change. So as Hilda mentioned, Voice of Witness is an oral history nonprofit. We try to advance human rights by amplifying the voices of people impacted by and fighting against injustice. We're driven by the transformative power of the story and by a strong belief that to have an understanding of systemic injustice would be incomplete without deep listening and learning from the people with firsthand experience. So through our oral history book series and our education program, Val amplifies these unheard voices, teaches ethics-driven storytelling, and partners with human rights advocates. So in this charla, we will explore with two of our narrators from Solito Solita how ethics-driven oral history can actually be a liberatory methodology, one that embodies an intersectional approach to storytelling. Luz will read an excerpt from her story, and I'll read from Christian's, and then we'll discuss some of their current and future work. So I'd love to have them briefly say hello now, give a little visual description of themselves and where they're calling from. And then I'll give a slightly more detailed intro to each of them a bit later before they read excerpts from their narratives. And then I'll say a little bit more about Val's approach. But first, oh, I forgot to give a visual description of myself. I have a round face, long, dark, straight hair, Asian woman in my 40s. I'm wearing a light green seafoam shirt. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to Luz to introduce yourself briefly.
Hi everyone, my name is Luz Hernandez, and I use Soledad Castillo in the book Solita Solita. I identify as a Latina woman wearing a long shirt with a long hair. Yeah, and I'm so excited to be here today.
Hello everyone, my name is Christian Diaz. I'm wearing a black t-shirt.
Super. So I'll just do a quick run through some of the hallmarks of our Voice of Witnesses approach to doing oral history and first person narratives. So I'd like to introduce it first by talking about Arundhati Roy's. She's a writer. She puts it this way: there's really no such thing as the voiceless. There are only the deliberately silenced or the preferably unheard. So with every Voice of Witness narrative, we aim for a novelistic level of detail in order to facilitate narrators' self-portrayal in all their complexity rather than case studies. So in doing that, we hope to illuminate broader issues that some of our narrators are dealing with. It's an invitation really to complexity and nuance and even contradictions. So we're always thinking about how do we practically and ethically do this? And one critical thing that we try to do is we flip the dynamic of who's considered an expert. So key experts for us are really people who've directly experienced and been affected by injustice. Through this personal narrative, oral history, we feel like we can get a little closer to people through their stories. As many of you already know, sharing stories can be powerful and transformative. And why is that? We think that it's because intimacy and vulnerability that gets transmitted it really helps to highlight insights that are otherwise harder to come by. And these personal narratives, as I hope Luz and Christian will talk about, can really help bring big, dramatic historical events down to a more human level. So for example, what you might read in a drier kind of human rights report in which maybe 2 or 3 sentences might be extracted from an interview, it's really dwarfed when you think about it by a nuanced narrative that has expansiveness, that has space and time to develop, where you hear about, Luz and Christian talking about their childhoods. There's drama, there's tension, there's maybe a surprise or two, there's joy, there's not only moments of pain and trauma, but the fullness of a life lived. And we really hope that it ends up reading more like a novel. And we recognize that, on the one hand, oral history is really egalitarian, it's accessible, and it's a compelling form of storytelling. It can also be really time and resource intensive. And if it is practiced unethically, it actually fails to meet some of this transformational potential. So again, some of the hallmarks of our approach, we're really conscious of and transparent about power dynamics, particularly between interviewers and narrators. We really try to be trauma informed and invested in avoiding re-traumatizing narrators. So, taking breaks, really like only talking about what you want to talk about, really being in control of how you shape your story, how you tell your story. And for us, it's a deeply collaborative process. We really feel like we're co-creating some of these narratives with our narrators. So we're not taking the stories from, but we're helping to facilitate the process of you bringing them out for the public. And just to kind of, the picture of it is, it's how is it collaborative? Sharing for the narrators, listening for the interviewers, and reading or listening again for the readers. And we think that they're all acts of love. And it's the opposite of extractive. It really takes time. It moves at the speed of trust. And we're really focused on cultivating relationships, cultivating stories, and cultivating community. And it's consent-based at every stage. Narrators will review probably more times than they wish at points. I know that Luz and Christian, we were constantly going back to you. Are you okay with this draft? What do you think about this? Where do we need to add more? Would you like to take anything out? That's how I think you always know that you own your stories and you're informed about where and how the narratives will be included or made public. So all of the above points that I tried to sketch out, they're really ideally in the DNA of how you do oral history. And I'd love to point people to, Val has put together principles of ethical storytelling, and you can check that out. I think someone's going to put a link to it in the chat. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Luz to talk about her excerpt, to read her excerpt. As was said earlier, Luz is a student in the UC Berkeley Social Welfare Master's Program. She was born in Honduras and came to the US as an undocumented immigrant at the age of 14. Luz, please take it away. Luz, I think you're still muted.
Sorry, everyone. Let me start over. The foster program paid the foster mom around $600 per month to take care of me. She would take me to the garage sales and buy me used clothes with holes in them for $1 or $2. Then she used the money from social services to buy things for her daughter at the mall and gave the receipts to the social worker. I saw all of this, but she would say, "You would better be nice to me because the other homes are worse. I'm treating you right." I didn't know how the system worked because no one told me that the foster parents are not supposed to treat you like this. Even though the social worker spoke Spanish, she never asked me, "Soledad, how's everything going?" They're supposed to talk to the child first, but we never had a private conversation about what was happening in the house. I was scared and nobody was there for me.
Thank you, Luz. Before we get into the questions, I'm going to go over to Christian to read his part. Christian is a recent graduate from UC Berkeley, also a narrator in Solito Solita. In the book, he shares his story of migrating to the US to seek asylum at age 15 after years of experiencing homophobia and abuse in Honduras. Christian is an advocate for immigrant youth and LGBTQ rights and will be starting a position with Teach for America in the fall. Actually, I'm going to be reading your excerpt, right, Christian? I will start. This is the section about asylum. When I was 15 in high school, I worried a lot about being deported to Honduras. I wondered, how can I stay permanently in the United States? First, I looked for help at an immigration lawyer's office in San Francisco, but was told that the US government wouldn't accept my application because I didn't have evidence of abuse, police reports, and such things. I was told that without official documents from Honduras, it's as if it had never happened. I tried with other organizations too. I felt disappointed, but was still unwilling to give up. My younger sisters had gotten help from Centro Legal de la Raza. They'd crossed the border as unaccompanied minors in 2014 during the big influx of children and were caught by La Migra. They were held for a while, then released. An attorney at Centro Legal helped them get legal residency. I made an appointment with her. She listened to my story and wrote it down. When I told her I lacked police records from Honduras, she told me that my word would suffice as evidence. I applied for asylum first because my dad used to beat me, and second, for everything else that I'd gone through. Applying for amnesty was a relatively quick process for me, about 4 months. We sent in papers in February 2015, and by March, they asked for my fingerprints. By April, they wanted an interview. I met with an official from US Immigration who listened to my story to confirm that everything was true. My lawyer and a translator were with me for the interview. The interview lasted about an hour. Although it had been difficult for me to tell my story before, it was no longer difficult at the asylum hearing. By then, I'd told my story to 2 therapists. I'd also spoken with a social worker. I returned to the US Immigration Office on May 5th, 2015. Everyone congratulated me because I was given political asylum. All right, so can we, at this point, we'll get into a little bit of questions with Luz. The first question I have for you, Luz, is can you share a little bit more about why you left Honduras and what your journey to the US was like?
Yeah, thank you, Dao. I grew up in poverty. I grew up in a small town called Tegucigalpa. In Tegucigalpa, there's a little town called Mateo. So I grew up there with my mom, my other siblings, and my grandmother. Unfortunately, my dad and my mom separated when I was born, and I grew up in a community where it was really tough. There was gun violence, poverty. There were some days that we didn't have nothing to eat. All that we ate was tortilla with salt, and really tough. And my mom grew up with this. My mom got remarried with my stepfather, and he didn't allow her to work. So it was only my grandmother and my stepfather who was providing to all of us, to me and my sister. But it was really tough by then because there were no jobs, and still Honduras is really right now the economy. And there's a lot of people graduating from college and still can find a job. So my dad came to the U.S. when I was born. Never hear about him until I was diagnosed with lupus at age 11. But before that, my grandmother was the person who actually raised me. But sadly, she passed away when I was 10 years old. And that was the most devastating thing for me because she actually cared about me and she actually took care, and she knew that my stepfather didn't see me as his daughter. It was always He would always treat me differently than my other sisters. And one day he physically and sexually touched me, and I went and I told my mom, but my mom didn't believe me. So I was the one who had to leave the house, uh, and it was heartbreaking for me to, telling my mom, yeah, my stepfather sexually assaulted me, and she didn't believe me, and I was just a child. And as a child, you expect your mom to come and hug you and tell you everything is gonna be okay, to save you, to take care of you. But instead, my mom packed my things in a little bag and sent me to the city to work. And by then I was only 11 years old. Um, when I was working in the city, when she sent me to work in the city, I got misdiagnosed with lupus. I was in the hospital for almost 2 years. I lost my hair. I was taking 15 pills a day for a year. The doctors told my family that I only have a few months left to live. Um, so I lost my grandmother. I got sexually assaulted by my stepfather. By then I didn't, and I was sick. So by then I didn't have any inspirations to continue living. And I would pray because I was suffering. I was suffering for the medication that I was taking. I lost my hair. So every day, every night, I would pray to God, like, please, I don't want to wake up tomorrow because I was suffering too much. My mom, nobody wanted to take care of me because they knew I had lupus and they knew that one day or another I would die. And not even my mom wanted to take care of me, not even, so I had my father, who was here in the US, reach out to her sister, and she was the one who took care of me, actually took care of me, knowing that I would die in any moment. So I had an accident. I was in bed. If you guys believe in miracles, I'm one of them. I was in bed. Literally, I only have like a few weeks left. I couldn't walk, but from nowhere, I decided to get out from that bed and went to the second floor, and I fell from the stairs. And I was taken to the hospital, and the hospital, the public hospital, say, oh, because I injured my leg really bad. And they say, well, you have lupus, like, I mean, your leg looks pretty bad, so let's just cut it off. And I remember that one person, one of the neighbors from my auntie house, she was like, no, I know she's gonna die, but she's gonna die with her 2 legs. So she decided to take me to the private hospital. And in that private hospital, they discovered that I never had lupus, that they misplaced my file with another patient. And I was taking pills, and I was in the hospital going through treatments and I didn't have lupus, but all the medication that I was taking, made the side effects, and I was literally, the pills was killing me. Uh, so I also believe in miracles. I guess that was not my time. I guess God had something prepared differently for me. I believe in that too. And yeah, so after I find out that I didn't have lupus, I stopped taking the pills, my hair started growing, I started walking, and I contacted my dad and I told him that I wanted to come to the US. I didn't want to come back with my mom because she was still living with my stepfather, and she didn't want me back when I was sick. So I felt that I had my sisters, and even though it broke my heart leaving my sister behind, I knew that I couldn't come back home with them. So my dad went back to to Honduras, and we decided to come together to the US. And it was heartbreaking leaving, because even though my mom didn't protect me when I most needed, it was hard for me to still leave her behind with my sisters. At the end of the day, I always say that we don't choose our parents. And now that I'm an adult, I believe that maybe she did whatever she could at that moment. And I try to understand, her actions and what happened during that time. And I love my mom. I love my mom, and she has hurt me a lot, but at the same time, she's always gonna be my mom. And living in Honduras was more like, it wasn't a choice. It was a necessity for me in order to have a better life, in order for start from zero. I was running from poverty. I was running away from my stepfather that had sexually abused me. I was starting over a new life after being in the hospital, being almost dying for 2 years. So for me, coming to the US was okay, this is I'm going to start from zero. And when we talk about the US and Honduras, we imagine this amazing country that everything is going to be easy, that everything is going to be perfect. But just to get to the US, it was really tough, walking for days in the desert, sometimes without eating, in order for me to walk for days, my dad had to buy this pill, I'm assuming was drugs, in order for me to make it. And I saw people being behind, not making it because it was so hard, the trip, like you had to pay extra if you want that pill. So that give you more energy in order to cross the borders. And it was just the experience to get to the US is only one part of the things that you have to go through in order to achieve the American dream.
Thank you so much, Luz. Um, Christian, can I ask you a similar question? What was it that caused you to leave Honduras, and what was your journey to the US like?
So at the beginning, it was like all about family reunification because I wanted to come see my mom after 10 years not seeing her. She left us when we were about 6, 7 years old. And um, I was 13, living in a neighborhood where gang violence was predominant. So, which meant that I had like three ways: one, getting involved with the gangs, still going to school and struggling because like I wasn't able to go to some schools that were like actually like good because of gangs and like how gangs will like overlap and they will have their own territories. And if I went to like a middle school in the other neighborhood where like the other gang is the rival one, then I was in danger. um the other option was also like committing a crime and going to jail or just getting killed by another gangster. So my options were limited, and my mom had no money saved, so basically we couldn't move somewhere else. And moving three minors somewhere like in Honduras, we could move to somewhere like in a little town, but that meant paying someone every month to take care of us, and nobody was willing to. So I asked my mom if she wanted to bring me to the US. She said no at the beginning. Then I kind of threatened her and told her that I was gonna leave by myself, even if she didn't like it. So at the end, she decided to save some money. It took her a couple of months. By November 2013, I decided to leave Honduras. I was only 14. Um, I remember my aunt telling me not to look back, and I just like jumped on that bus to Guatemala. I got robbed by the Honduran police a few times. They wanted bribes because like I was a minor trying to leave the country. Also, like I didn't have a passport or birth certificate, so they couldn't prove that I was the person trying to leave. So they had me in a cell for a whole day. So I jumped to Guatemala. I promised them that I was gonna go back to Tegucigalpa, but I was lying. I jumped the border from Honduras to Guatemala. I stayed in a hotel for a night. The next day, I was like leaving to Mexico. When I left Mexico, it was like all good because like the police in Guatemala had to stop us only once in a checkpoint, and they just asked for 50 quetzales. After that, like in Mexico, was all about bribes, paying um, people and police and officials to get across. So if you had money, you were likely to make it through. If you were poor, basically, or you had no money, your chances were low. Your chances were getting killed, getting deported, or like somewhere in those lines. And my mom luckily paid us someone to bring us from Mexico to all through Mexico, and we were stopped by the Zetas in um, Tamaulipas. It was we were about to get to the U.S. border through Miguel Alemán, and I remember like the Zetas coming to the bus at 3 a.m. and saying like, okay, like who is from Central America? And I didn't raise my hand because I knew what was gonna happen. So another person coming from Honduras, from the capital as well, he got off the bus and he was asked for the actual password or passcode that they give you, and it was Mario at that point, and he couldn't say it and he forgot. So he said that many of us were going on the bus along with him, and I remember going and like talking to the Zetas for the passcode, and I gave it to them, and they were super mad with the kid, and they wanted to kill him. And some other people, as I said it before, people who doesn't have like the money to pay the bribes, they got off the bus into a car, and they took them, the Zetas, with them. So maybe they were killed, or their families were like asked for money. Um, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing with us. I think at this point, we're going to switch into bringing Hilda back so that we can have conversation with all of us.
Thank you, Dow. Also want to remind everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A box so that we can also bring folks into the conversation, and also very curious just to see what people are thinking and the kinds of questions that you'd like to bring up as part of this conversation. But I think to keep this piece going with Cristiana and with Luz, I think we would all just really love to hear more about how you hope that people are hearing your stories today, and what you would like people to learn from your experience.
I guess for me, it's just to share a little bit more about what is behind when people immigrate to this country, right? We often like think that we should come here because we want to. And no, many of us are forced because our circumstance back home. And I don't think nobody wants to leave their family behind. We have parents coming here, leaving their children behind. And now we had children also immigrating. And you should imagine the circumstances that they're living over there in order to, to put at risk their lives, their children's lives. And it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad in Central America. I'm talking about Honduras because I had come back since I came back here, and the situation is not getting better. It's getting worse. And it's just to bring our experience is for people to get a little bit more education for especially the people that are not from Central America, people that are like people that doesn't know exactly what's going on there, and choose to bring our personal stories. I think choose to educate others about, the situations back there. And hopefully because we have also people making policies, people that they don't have personal experience, making these policies about undocumented people, about Latinos in general, and we're not part of that. So I guess it's like bringing awareness about more about our struggles and the reasons why we are immigrating, and hopefully we can touch those hearts from people making policy so we can have, a better system for all of us.
So I think that sharing my story was like one of the hardest decisions, but I knew that more people had the same experience, and as Latinos, we know that we all encounter so many struggles. And the first one is migration and deciding to migrate from Honduras as um, um, it is so difficult. And also, like I remember in high school how other students will share their stories and how difficult it was for them to leave their countries, and also how they got also abused by family members or some community members. And I was like, okay, so I'm brave enough to share my story, and that's why I did, because I know so many other people can relate to my story. And even if it is like through migration, through abuse, through domestic violence, any of the topics that were talked in the book, I guess like anyone will relate. And even if they don't relate themselves, they know someone who is struggling or who has encountered so many of those things. And I guess like talking about gangs and all that, how we struggle in Honduras with gangsters and crime every single day is like similar to the US. And I guess like gun violence is a huge issue. I live in Oakland. I hear shots every single day, and it's like getting all those memories back. And those are things that are not we're not capable of like preventing, only if lawmakers do at some point.
Thank you both so much. I'm going to share a question here from the folks who are joining us today. Luz and Cristiano, what are you most excited about for the future in terms of your own future and for your communities?
I'm currently doing my master right now at UC Berkeley, and I'm excited to finish it in 1 year. I need only more year to finish. And I'm excited about the knowledge that I'm getting. I had to say that I feel I recognize my privilege to have to be like to getting access to higher education, and I'm just getting more aware of things of how I can support back to the community. I'm yeah, I'm really excited. I'm really excited to finish my master's, to going back to the community and use my voice to help my community, especially my Latino community.
For me, I was about to join Teach for America this fall, but I decided that I was gonna take a year off. So technically, I will be teaching middle school next year, fall 2023. And that's one of my dreams, like getting to teach students. I remember like in elementary school in Honduras, I had a teacher. I didn't pass first grade back in 2005. So there was one teacher at some point that went and she sat with me and she taught me how to read, how to write, and how to even talk. And she was there like 1 or 2 hours after class, and she wanted me to like to improve my skills. So she took the time herself. Unfortunately, she left to Spain because as a teacher she wasn't getting paid enough. But I feel so amazed by her actions, and that's why I decided to become a teacher, when my first thing was becoming a lawyer. But I think I can make so much by talking to children, and also getting to know them. And at that point, I guess we can, as teachers, we can see when a child is struggling, when they are getting abused. And if the schools reported everything that they saw, I guess like children's life will be better. And I knew some of my teachers knew back home that I was struggling, that I was going through hard times, but they couldn't speak up because there was not help at all. So even if they told the police what was happening, they knew that there were no resources or anything.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. And we have another question here that I think you can all comment on, including Dow. Folks are curious to know what organizations that you would recommend where people maybe can think about volunteering to be able to support refugees who are coming from Central or South America. And Cristian and Luz, I know that you both had experiences with organizations in the Bay Area. Maybe you want to talk about them. And Dow, if you want to mention some of the others that are in the book. And then I will also shamelessly plug our own website and encourage people to go and look at hipfunds.org and look at the list of the organizations that we work with who work with migrants and refugees all across the region.
I will talk about the East Bay Sanctuary Convent in Berkeley. I'm recently working there. I'm currently working there right now. and we help asylum seekers. We have a couple of lawyers there helping undocumented people get their asylums. And there are many ways that you can volunteer there. We have youth coming to renew their DACA, like asking for parole permits. So we do so many things there, and we're short staff, and it would be nice to have a volunteers there. And we do amazing job. We not only help through immigration, like immigration services, but we also provide case management for the Latino community looking for housing, looking for other services that they may qualify in the on the whole East Bay.
For me, it was like Centro Legal de la Raza and Centro Familiar. I guess Centro Familiar taught me a lot, starting by teaching me how gangs and gang related things are bad for society, and they had a good program when I just arrived. And I guess I was getting along with some people that I wasn't supposed to at the beginning, and they made sure to separate me from them. And also they got to change the mindset of many of the other students that were trying to pursue like a gang career, as they said it at that point. But I guess Centro Legal and Centro Familiar, both of them helped me a lot through mental health. They provide mental health and counseling. I had a social worker and also like a case manager. The case manager like taught me a lot, and I appreciate him a lot. And also like he made sure that I understood how messed up Honduras is. And I knew that it was as bad as like I knew some information of the Honduran president being a narco even before he was indicted, or even before he was extradited to the US a few months ago. I knew how he would bring like bags of money to the neighborhood where I used to live, and the things he was doing. And I guess like he made me realize through Centro Familiar how messed up our countries are, and how much education needs to be given to many youth. As when I went back in 2019, I saw so many of my cousins, um, um, classmates, and as gangsters. And when I saw all of them, like it was like almost a 90% of his class, like all male like students, most of them in the streets with like firearms, and it was like disappointing.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add, Hilda. Maybe for people to check out, there's a little section in the back of the book, 10 things you can do, that also highlights a few other organizations, but most of the groups that I would recommend are actually in the narratives themselves, because the narrators talk about who they worked with, what they found useful. And I think there's a lot of great information in the book.
Absolutely, thank you. And again, highly encourage everyone, get the book. And there's another question that we started talking about a little bit the other day, and wanted to bring back and start with you, Dow, about ethical storytelling. And if you wanted to talk to us just a little bit more about that practice. And I'm fascinated by the connection with ethical storytelling and liberation, and would love to just hear more about how you practice that.
Great question. I mean, I think for me, it's the difference between reading a news story or reading a human rights report and reading a novel. It's a transformative and transporting experience. It's much more immersive. It's much more puts you in, hopefully, the frame of mind of your narrator. And so in this case, you're there with Luz as she's laying in her bed, contemplating, how to escape her situation. You're there with Christian when he is crossing the border, and you hopefully experience some of the emotional texture that is threaded through their lives. And I guess I think that it is a it's a more effective way of reaching people in the sense of, it's not just relying on your intellect telling you that these policies are wrong, but it gives you a sense of what it actually does to people. As you said, helping us see not just the statistics and the numbers and the policies on paper, but to see how it actually impacts, and in particular, in this case, young people with so much promise that gets a knot that isn't able to be attained. So much potential. I mean, as you can see, Luz alluded to it, but even once you get to the United States, it's not as if the obstacles and the difficulties and the challenges disappear. They're just a whole different set of new ones. And just to have, from someone who experienced it themselves, they know better than anyone else what that was, what that experience was, and then also, I think, what some of the solutions might be. I really feel like the sense that you can get from hearing Luz and Christian talk, just how effective it was that they became their own best advocates and also advocates for others like them. And I'm sure they can tell you more about it than I can. But our approach is really basically like, how do we make sure that your voices get heard and your thoughts and ideas get highlighted, that you're recentered in your own stories? Because I think people reading them will get that. And we will also, we're constantly learning, and that's that kind of inquisitive approach is really what we want to highlight.
I want to blend a couple of threads of questions that are coming in here, and maybe we start with you, Dao, and then we'd love to hear from Christian and from Luz. But something that I found unique and really powerful about the book is exactly this arc of the narrative of the root causes of what drove people to leave their homes, and then what that experience was like in the journey, and then also what life was like once they got to the US, and then the folks are revisited in the book. And these are not easy stories to read, and I will confess that I had to put the book down. At one point I was reading it on the plane and I started crying and I had to put the book down. But I would love to hear from you all about what you think in terms of the importance of bearing witness, because I know that this is part of my responsibility as a person who in the world, but also who does the work that I do. So would love to hear from you about the role of bearing witness and how we do that in a way that supports people who are willing to be brave enough to share their stories with us.
Maybe it makes sense, Luz and Christian, if you want to talk about the genesis of this book project. And I know that it started with you knowing Stephen Mayer, who's one of the editors. You were taking classes with them, and that's how they initially got to know you. I think it's an amazing story. And yeah, if you would want to talk about that.
Yeah, I can talk. Yeah, sharing the story, it wasn't easy. I think, especially in my culture in Honduras, and my family, we're not supposed to share what is happening at home. Everything that happens at home, you keep it, you're not telling anyone. So for me to open up to strangers, to my professor, it was like really something like that I really like. It was hard at the beginning, but I'm really glad that I did, because I have so much inside of me, so much pain, that I feel like me sharing this story, it was hard. Yes, a hard process, but at the same time, it was a healing process to let everything go, and to meet people who have been through the same things that I have before. And I met my Stephen Mayers. He was my English professor, and I was reading this story, Underground America, which is another book from Voice of Witness that talks about the experience of undocumented people. And I related so much to that person. And I remember being in class and feeling that pain in my chest, because I was like feeling her pain through that book. I was feeling her pain because I went through the same. And you know, when you get moved by a story, you know what you do with that story. You know, what are the action? What is your next? What are you gonna do? And you know, my action was okay. Let me find ways why this person was able to talk, to write about her story, and why I cannot. And you know, and I decided to get into the project. And you know, Stephen and Jonathan was so nice through the whole process. They really were patient. They, you know, I took breaks in between, and they didn't send me. They didn't set the navigators as a project. They saw them as a people, as a person. We, you know, the stories. We, with those stories, we humanize more those stories. And I feel that Stephen and Jonathan did that with us. They were like really patient and give us the power to share how much we share and how and what we didn't want to share. And every time when I go to do events and I see young girls, they come to me and I was like, yes, I went through sexual abuse and I couldn't talk about that, and I see their pain. And you know, we have so much in our culture, we don't talk about it. We have normalized sexual abuse that is unbelievable. And when I see that young girls are coming to me and say, thank you for sharing, thank you, I'm not alone, that means a lot to me. And I feel that I'm not only sharing my story, but also letting other people know you're not alone and let's do something about it.
For me, I met Jonathan and Steven at Centro Legal de la Raza, the same organization that helped me with my asylum case. Basically, they were asking lawyers for any individuals that wanted to talk to them about their like immigration experience. And I remember they proposed the idea of talking to them first. And I remember Jonathan and Steven were amazed when I was telling my whole story because I was like already open on telling them. And it took 5 years to write the book. So it was like a lengthy process, worth it. But they were pretty how can I say, they were so good at their work that they were like able to make us comfortable with the process instead of like as they said in mental health, they didn't left the whole thing open. They made sure to close our brain back, so they were able to we were able to tell them the hardest part of the stories, but we were also able to tell them um, things that we had fun with back home. So they would ask, how was your immigration experience? And then they would ask a good question or something that would remind us of something good, and or ask us about our culture, our traditions, and then we will be happy to tell them about that as well. And I guess that was one of the main things why the whole book is successful, because they were able to engage with us and also to see us as real human beings struggling and trying to become a better part of society.
Beautiful. Thank you. Dow, is there anything that you would like to add at this point as our time is ticking away?
No, I think Luz and Christian said it.
We are getting to that time, so I want to thank Luz and Christian, especially for joining us today, for sharing your stories, for the incredible work that you're doing right now to help people feel comfortable and welcome and like they belong in all of the spaces where you are and everywhere that you work. Thank you, Dow and Voice of Witness, for making this work possible and for educating all of us about storytelling and the role that we all have to play in our individual spaces and our individual jobs to be able to amplify and support folks like Luz and Christian and everyone who's featured in this book. I want to encourage everyone to get a copy of this book and go onto the Voice of Witness website and see all of the books and resources that they have available, as well as on the Haymarket website. They have these books and many, many other amazing resources that folks should be checking out. A reminder also in Solito Solita to be able to look at the lesson plans and incorporate this work into how you are thinking and educating others. And in particular, look at the resource list that Dal mentioned in the back if you want to get more involved and more engaged. And welcome everyone to please look at our new website to see what other events we have coming up, other book charlas that are coming up in the future, and hopefully other events that we do with Voice of Witness. So thank you all for joining us today. And again, deep appreciation to Luz and Christian and Voice of Witness and everybody who was able to make this possible. Thank you. Bye, everyone.